Hi, everybody. I'm here with CJ, the synagogue, and he is, did I pronounce that correctly? No, synagogue. Synagogue.
Yes, ma'am. Synagogue.
So he's an aspiring Christian apologist. I think that's what it says on your Twitter account. And he and I have been interacting for quite a while, and I've actually seen him do a really good job on some debates on the Modern Day Debate channel. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and ask him to introduce himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for thank you very much for having me here. So I am CJ Cox. As she said, I run the YouTube channel The Synagogue, which also has a BitChute, Rumble, and Library equivalents with virtually no content on them. So you can check those out if you'd like, but there's not much to check out, at least yet. So I do, as SJ has already said, I do Christian apologetics, and I also do some news punditry on a little podcast on that Synagogue channel I called The Watchdog. Actually, two podcasts there, Watchdog and on apologetics. And I, in the future, hope to get some philosophy and history and stuff like that, as well as stuff in the fictional realm, like writing and things of that nature on as well. I actually might have a second YouTube channel up here within the next week that is strictly dedicated to like movies and media and stuff like that. So, provided I can run them both, hopefully we'll be able to get that going. But nonetheless, that's sort of the basics of where I'm coming out with it. I am someone who's rather fundamentalist, all things considered. I like to distance myself, of course, from a lot of those fundamentalists like Steven Anderson, right, who don't actually understand the fundamentals of the Bible at all. But you look back at some of the old like Billy Sunday types. It's almost a spitting image of my own theology, and that's kind of the gist of it, I guess.
So were you always a Christian? Were you raised a Christian, or how did you come to your belief system?
Well, so it's kind of an interesting thing, actually. So I was born in a pretty very highly religious household, actually. My dad is a frequent church attender, right? He's there every Sunday and Wednesday as well. Always knows in the Bible, right? And very serious about the faith, right? Not like just a religious person. I honestly wasn't so much. I kind of was bored with it. I was a kid. I used to fall asleep in the church pews and stuff like that. And when my parents finally split, my mom became as jack Christian as you possibly could imagine. So I kind of just disregarded it entirely. And I actually, I'd like to refer to myself at this point in time as a Jack Buddhist, because that's essentially what I was at the time, right? I knew what Buddhism was, but I wasn't really following it. I liked it. I thought it was cool. Thought Siddhartha Gautama was a great philosopher, all this kind of stuff, right? But in the end, I was really just a teenage kid doing teenage kid stuff. Finally, I ended up getting in an awful lot of trouble, actually, ditching school, smoking weed, even breaking into cars and stuff like that, things that are just no fun at all. Got caught up. Go to juvie, right? And of course, sitting there in juvie, I have an awful lot of time to reflect on my life. And I actually ended up reading both the Bible and the Left Behind series. And there's a scene in one of the Left Behind books after after everything's been announced, where they start rounding up all the Christians and they're taking them up to the guillotine and they start singing Amazing Grace while they're going to their demise. And for whatever reason, at that moment in time, I just really intently felt the need to repent of my own sins and to make sure that I was, it's great to be nose and left behind, but I got to have nose in the Bible. I got to be worshiping God. I got to be with him. And it's kind of just gotten stronger and stronger since then. The Lord has been able to free me from numerous things, right? I'm no longer a criminal, right? No longer going out popping pills and things like that. A lot of that stuff has been multiple years at this point, right? I was 15 when I got arrested. I'm 22 now. And that's sort of been the gist of, I guess, where I've been coming from. You know what I mean? It's been a interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. That's actually really interesting. So, and I didn't know that about you. I didn't know your background at all, and I also didn't realize how young you were. You're only 22. You've got a lot of years ahead of you. So that's awesome. So I was curious. When you guys went to church when you were a little kid, did you go to a particular denomination, or was it like an open denomination?
Well, actually, it's interesting. The answer is kind of a yes and no in that. So very intensely anti-denominational family. I to this day am intensely anti-denominational. To make a long story short, so I agree with most of what Calvin would say, for example, right? But if I call myself a Calvinist, I'm identifying with a man who did not die on the cross for my sins and raise again on the third day. Right. So I like to just stick with the word Christian. We can explain, all the things that are particular about, my belief system and stuff like that. And that's always been the way that my dad was as well. But my dad did attend churches, which they're known as message believers, actually. I'm not sure if you have heard of the minister William Branham, but there was a minister living from about 1909 to 1965. William Marion Branham lived here in the United States, actually. And he claimed to actually be the last age prophet, right? Like a second coming of Elijah. And so those are the churches that we always attended when I was a kid, was those message believing churches, which I got, it's a very interesting kind of a thing because, you have, Joseph Smith claimed to be a prophet and everything that he said. And Russell, I can't remember his first name, but Taze Russell, and everything he said with the Jehovah's Witnesses and Muhammad and that kind of stuff. And you go into a message believing church, and honestly, it just feels like you're in a Pentecostal church. There's no difference between them and Pentecostals. They just happen to believe in the and I compare it a lot to Seventh-day Adventists, actually, in that same sense, and that they do believe in the prophecies of Ellen G. White. But other than that, they're just basic Christians in every way. That's a lot how being raised in a message household was.
I feel like I'm going to sneeze. So if I all of a sudden stop for a second, I might have to sneeze. No, that's interesting. I'm actually completely unfamiliar with that group. And so I see a question here from Taking Back Eden. I want to say hi to everybody in the chat, by the way. Hate Love Nothing and Mr. Parker, Taking Back Eden. And he says he's a Christian flat earther. And so he's just wondering about claims in the Bible with the flat earth. And so we have a flat earther in the crew here. So that's taken it to the most fundamental, I guess, if you want to say fundamentalists. And so I actually have to say, I kind of agree with you on the fundamentalists position, but I don't like to be clumped in with the traditional fundamentalists here in the United States, because some of them are this, just like you said, with the, out there bashing people in the military and doing all this kind of stuff and with the signs. And I don't agree with the Westboro Baptists and those people like that. And so I feel like if we're supposed to follow Jesus, we're supposed to try to be kind to our neighbors and, to not go out there and just start shouting things at people and kind of making yourselves look really bad. So I don't know if you're familiar with that group.
Yeah, very well, actually. And I completely agree too, because, it's always been interesting to me that, when people claim fundamentalism, it does tend to be extremism, right? In the US, at least. And, really, if you actually look at what, the definition of fundamentalism is, which is, of course, just a strict adherence to the fundamentals of a particular ideology. There's actually no room for hate in a fundamentalist Christian, right? Because that's completely contrary to the fundamentals of Christianity. And so it is interesting that we've gotten in a time in history, right, where Stephen Anderson would be considered somebody who is a fundamentalist, but James White maybe not so much anymore. That's a weird thing to me, because I consider James White to be the more fundamentalist of the two. And kind of even the same here with the flat Earth gentleman, or I guess I'm not entirely sure, but nonetheless, you have instances in the Bible that certainly can be confusing if you just take them in a vacuum, right? But there's nothing actually fundamental to the scriptures that would actually declare that you have to believe in, flat or round Earth. It just kind of is somewhat silent on the issue. It does say that the Earth is a circle, but as some flat earthers have pointed out, there's ways that they can get around that, with their whatever, I guess, what model, I guess, is what you would call it. Right. But yeah, no, I think it is interesting that term is it's almost become hijacked in a way, you know what I mean? And by people who are more extremists than they are fundamentalists, for sure. I would also just say to the commenter, I actually did a debate with Iger Television on Praise I Am That I Am's channel, if you're interested, on whether or not the Bible teaches a flat Earth. Spoiler alert, it does not.
Yeah, well, I saw that interesting point here by John Maddox. He says, Taking Back Eden, Effie, have you ever considered the fact that the universe is flat, but that doesn't mean the Earth is? I think that's an interesting thought on there. It's something I've never thought about. So, yeah,
I guess I've never even thought of the universe having defined shape, even. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just sort of like just expanding.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So how have your interactions been? See, I'll tell you a real quick story. I had to delete my other account. my Twitter account because since about October, I've been realizing that it's more of a, it just brings on anxiety for me because I had a lot of really negative people on there who kept responding to a lot of my my tweets. And even if I would mute them, I'd still see them time and again, constantly coming in there with just some really nasty things sometimes. And so I thought to myself, this account is, even though I had a lot of followers, I thought this account is just more of a detriment than an asset. And so I was thinking about what to do about it. And so then I also had another account. I have now a couple accounts, but or right now I've got just this one account, but I had another account. And so I jumped into that account and I protected the tweets, and you're on that one. But I had a third account, which was called Dash 53, but that one I deleted about a month ago. And so I did that because the interactions can be really negative. And I do want to develop nice relationships with atheists and agnostics and people with whom I disagree, but I don't want the hostility. And so I thought I'll just sort of really watch the people who try to, who want to follow me on this account, and I won't see the hostility. And it's just been a really beautiful week, I have to say. I've 8 days now in with this just one account, and it's quite pleasant. But I don't know, how do you deal with that? Do you see any hostility, or is it pretty pleasant on your timeline?
I'll be honest. For the most part, it's not only is it kind of hostile, excuse me, but I've somewhat thrown myself into a little bit of a flame, so to speak. I kind of became, I wouldn't say close by any stretch of the imagination, but acquainted certainly with the Raging Atheist and John Peterson. And a little bit of. I'm sorry, say again.
Yeah, I know them too. I forgot about that. Our connection through that.
Yeah, we actually, I believe we did a debate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was me. That was nice in a lot of ways, because it was kind of this thing where it's like, okay, maybe this person isn't somebody who I've managed to convince of anything at this point in time, but there's a possibility, number one. Number two, there's a possibility of peace, right? Mm-hmm. Just being friendly with each other and all this sort of stuff. And I actually, figured that for a long time that might end up being the way that it works. Now, the problem ended up coming to in that eventually there was going to be something that Rage just did not appreciate about my beliefs, and he would, consider it to be evil and something like that. And numerous times something would come up where it's like, oh, is this going to be it? Right. When I would, for example, defend biblical morality or, God's judgment in the flood or things like that. But every time there would seemingly be a step back and a step back and a step back. And then combination of things, actually. Number one, my claim to being a pro-life radical. And then number two, my claim that I don't believe there's any evidence to suggest that Gavin McInnes and the Proud Boys are racist. I think they're basically trolls, honestly. And they have turned trolling into a group that goes out and fights people. You know what I mean?
I'm not familiar with them. I've heard Proud Boys, but the only time I saw Proud Boys on Twitter was people actually making fun of them with tweets of people that weren't them. It was like, So I haven't really kept up with that.
Well, to give a brief insight, because it is important. They started off as a joke group. It was this whole thing where Gavin was, I think he was with Anthony Cumia, if you know the Opie and Anthony show. And they're talking just, kind of BSing, for lack of a better term. I mean, they're not really talking about anything per se. And then all of a sudden, they came up with this idea. Well, what if we just had a men's group where we just sat around on weekends and got drunk, and every time you wanted to be somebody who's new, we'd, beat you up until you can name 10 breakfast cereals. You know what I mean? And it's it was sort of just like a high school thing. Well, then Gavin McInnes goes to New York University and he gets assaulted. And he gets pepper sprayed on his face. A whole huge crowd of at least 1,000 people out there, looking to actually remove him from NYU campuses and physically if needed. And so at that point in time, Gavin turned the Proud Boys into a self-defense group, where it was basically, we're going to show up at these protests, and if Antifa gets violent, then we'll get violent too. And while I certainly, and while I certainly understand where he's coming from, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't think it's particularly. Joe Rogan actually tried to tell him about that, saying that I get what you're doing, but you understand that the next guy to come back with a bat, and then you come back with a bat, and then he comes back with a gun. You know what I mean? And then all that sort of stuff.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, it really, really is. But the main claim against them is that they're this white supremacist terrorist group. And it's like, you can disagree with their methods for sure. You can say that there's problems. The same way I would even with like Antifa or like the Black Panthers or something like that. But, they're led by a half Latino, quarter black, quarter white person. He's certainly not a racist. Gavin McInnes himself has since stepped down, right? They have a Latino chapter that is dedicated entirely to Latino members. That's obviously not something you do if you're racist, right? And so, it was just a defense of them on that level, right? Of their, rights to speak. They're not a terrorist group or anything like that, in my opinion.
So what is their main goal? Is it to just fight for the right to have free speech? Is that pretty much it, or?
Yeah, if you so according to Joe Biggs and Gavin McInnes and the current leader, whose name I can't remember, the half Latino guy, the goal is strictly to defend right-wing speech, basically, right? And that anything from conservative moderates like the Mitt Romney type to those who are a little bit more controversial, like your Milo Yiannopoulos. But just the basic idea is we defend people's ability to speak when others are going out against them. But they do have some like ideological things about them too. Like they consider themselves Western chauvinists, which, yeah, I can't say I disagree with them on one end, but on another end, it's like, because the idea is like, oh, well, Western society has built the new world and we're not going to apologize for that. And it's like, well, that's fair. That's accurate. Maybe don't be so culturally insensitive, though. That might not be the best way for people, because you just ask for trouble. You know what I mean? But it's certain elements like that they do buy into as far as an ideology. But I don't even think that's a guaranteed thing for all of them. You know what I mean?
I don't really have the thing is the people always say, are we in a patriarchy? And they talk a lot about that. And they say patriarchy in kind of a denigrating way. But if you look at the Bible and you look at the way God organized things, he actually did set us up in a hierarchy. And, the man is the head of the household and the female is assisting, or whatever you want to say. That's how it's set up. And I tried to deny that. I went all through the Bible, tried to find verses where I could actually shove against that. And I realized, it's not just in a couple of verses, it's in a lot of verses. And so you just have to, okay, well, that's the deal. And actually it makes sense. You can't have two presidents. You can have one president, one vice president. so I'm good with that. So. Well, did you say you're a radical? Did I hear you right? Did you say you're a radical pro-lifer? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. Okay, we're on the same page, because I've become more radical in that. So I've completely changed my views. I was pro-choice years ago. I even drove a friend to an abortion clinic, and now I've done a full 180. And so tell me about your views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and praise God for that too as well. I'd like that testimony for sure, even if it is a short one. So my personal views have always been relatively harsh on abortion, in that I don't believe, first off, in exceptions. Now I'm willing to speak with someone who believes in exceptions, absolutely, provided that they are arguing strictly for exceptions and not for this is a means to legitimize the whole process, right? But for example, like when people say, well, what about a girl who's under the age of 16, right? And she gets pregnant. It's like, well, that just doesn't seem like, I don't personally see the logic in, you were 15 when you got pregnant, therefore let's go kill your child. You know what I mean? It doesn't compute to me logically. And even, some of the hard stuff that I have absolutely no experience with whatsoever, like, sexual assault. I still don't see, you can imagine a mother who is attacked by her spouse, and she sees her 7-year-old child who was the product of that spouse, and she kills him, right? It's like, well, that obviously doesn't make any sense. So why would it make any sense when the child's no longer 7, or is not yet 7? And so I've always kind of believed in a complete and total ban of abortion, the exception being threat to the mother's life, simply because I don't even think that's legally considered in abortion. I think they usually consider that to be C-section. And they almost never end up terminating the child's life when they perform cesarean section, right? That like virtually never happens. And I do definitely believe in legal punishments for abortionists. I think that, I am a very strong believer in grace. And from a religious perspective, I think any one of them is certainly able to, put down the pliers and turn over to God, right? I mean, Paul was essentially Osama bin Laden before he was Paul the Apostle. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah, and David, look what King David did. David killed Bathsheba's husband, or
Yeah,
sent him off to be
exactly.
killed. And so yeah,
Exactly.
no, I agree with you. I actually see. I'm not 100%. I mean, let me put it this way. I'm uncomfortable. I feel like you shouldn't legislate based on the exceptions, and the cases of rape and incest are less than 1%. And so I feel like I'm just going to give them what they want and say, okay, let these women in those choices or those situations make a choice. That's what I would say. But then I'm looking at the other 99% of people who are, in many cases, doing this out of inconvenience, or they feel they can't afford it and that kind of thing. And I look and I find these adoption agencies, like the American Adoption Agency, that says that for every child put up for adoption, there are up to 36 waiting couples. And so, and I know that's not the same as the foster system. I know the foster system is pretty horrible, but the private adoption system, there are people who will help pay for these kids and pay for the mom to be taken care of and pay for the hospitalization and all that kind of stuff. And so I feel like if the mother can just hold out 9 months, if she doesn't want to raise the child, at least she can do that. And there are all these loving parents trying to adopt because they can't have their own kids. So that's what I see.
And I would even kind of point out too, because I've had these conversations now. I mean, I'm sure you even know, right? When you get online, you end up having these conversations almost daily. And it's interesting because people will point out, yeah, well, the foster system is obviously it's a terrible system, and I'm not even going to pretend that's not the case. 400,000 people in the foster system is obviously problematic. But I've always kind of pointed out, it's like, well, what's better? 400,000 people who are, maybe they don't have parents, maybe they don't have the most luxurious life in the world, or 900,000 people who are dead, right? It's over double the number, and they're not uncomfortable. They're not even traumatized. They're dead. You know what I mean? Like it's a pretty big deal comparatively. And, I've found for the most part, there's actually not a whole lot of answer for that, it seems. And honestly, I think a lot of pro-choicers, what it ends up kind of boiling down to, and this is just my personal view, I think there's a large group of people who are just straight up God haters. And so they hate things that are associated with God, including but not limited to sanctity of life. I think there's another large group of people, though, who are honestly, they're so influenced by this ideological feminism that has come from the 1960s. Right. And of course, not including the feminism that had come before it. That it almost seems like when you say these things, and not even just an abortion thing, but like, for example, we had just kind of mentioned the patriarchal system a little bit earlier, right? The mere mention of these things, people have almost been trained since birth to sort of be repulsed by, right? Like, you want to take away a woman's right to choose, or you think the men should be, head of the household or something like that. It's just gross. You're gross. Why do you believe these things? It's 2020, dude. And fun fact, that's actually the origin of my logo, is that people kept calling me a Neanderthal or saying I was stuck in the 50s. So I created a Neanderthal who was wearing clothes that looked like the 1950s. But I think that people they get so influenced by this ideology that it becomes very difficult for them to actually see past it. And when you start having conversations with them, it doesn't happen automatically. In fact, sometimes it doesn't even happen for a couple of years. But you can see almost every conversation the breakdown of this view, right? 99% of abortions are not for cases of rape or incest or threat to the mother's life or the underage of the female or threat to the fetus. Mm-hmm. Less than 1% for all of those things combined, right? And you tell that to somebody who maybe they're just your average 26-year-old boy or girl living in the United States trying to make ends meet, that sort of thing. They've never even thought about that. All they've thought about is that I as a woman or I as a man don't have the right to tell a woman not to have a right to choose. You know what I mean? And that's a big part of the reason. I know that it is, excuse me, I'm stuttering a little bit. I know that it isn't something that people typically like to address in the modern day, but I do personally like to put myself up as an enemy of modern feminism because I do believe that it is a absolutely dangerous ideology. I think it's a philosophy that leads girls to basically consider themselves nothing more than objects, ironically enough. And I think that it is one of the key things that leads to these sorts of things, like, not just abortion and rejection of things like the system God has set up, but also things like the sexualization of young girls, right?
Mhm.
Cuties is published by a
Oh, that's
feminist.
awful.
Cardi
Yeah.
B is a feminist, right? Nicki Minaj is a feminist. Madonna is a feminist. And it's like, okay, so these people who are actively leading to the massive degradation and sexualization and objectification of women and girls, well, they all consider themselves to be feminist. And the point being that, like, I think that it's an ideology we would do well to address, because
Mhm.
it's not the same as it once was, when it was just we want women to have the right to vote and be able to work. Nor is it something that I think is compatible with a Christian worldview in the modern day.
Yeah, I just to jump in there, I considered myself a feminist for many, many years. And then suddenly I start looking at these new, like you pointed it out, modern feminists and what their views are, and those go completely against what I stand for. And so I've decided I'm not gonna jump on that bandwagon, because it's just I disagree with them vehemently on all kinds of things. And so it's not just giving people equal rights, which is how that was my take on it initially. I was just like, okay, feminism, yeah, sure, give women equal rights. We
Right.
have equal rights as women, and so we've been given that. In the West, we got a pretty good deal. As women, we're able to vote, we're able to do a lot of things, and so and that's where I would jump on the feminist thing. Until now, these new definitions that take in other things. Let me just quickly break here to say something. I want to tell Evolution False. That's Darth Dawkins. He's in the chat. If I called him a troll, I apologize for calling him a troll. He said I called him a troll in another chat. I actually don't recall calling him a troll, but I will take his word for it that I probably did. So if I did, I'm sorry, Darth Dawkins. Please accept my apology. And so I just wanted to quickly say that.
Absolutely. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Darth Dawkins.
Yeah,
He goes
yes.
by atheism now, right?
He was Duncan Atheism. Yeah, he came in my channel once, and then kind of left a little abruptly, but I want to talk about him since he's in the chat, and he that would be not allowing him to have his word to talk back. So
Right.
I won't say anything else. But anyways, so yeah, going back to this idea, some of these I want to kind of circle back to bring this all together, because there's a rebellion against God. And I was listening to this Jordan Peterson thing on Cain and Abel, and I was fascinated by what he said about Cain. And he said how both Cain and Abel were giving sacrifices to God, but God valued Abel's sacrifice and he didn't value Cain's sacrifice. And so Cain started becoming very angry with God. And that anger led to looking at the people whom God valued, and looking at Abel, and started getting really angry towards Abel. And so his anger just kind of built up, because Abel was God's preferred one, if you want to call it that. And Cain wasn't. And it might be something that we see even today with some people saying, okay, look at these people going out there, like you might say Frank Turek or somebody like that, or William Lane Craig. And they say that these people are evil and all this kind of stuff because they disagree with their ideas. And so they go after those people. And I felt like maybe they were going after me on Twitter for kind of the same reasons. If God gives me favor, or just, likes what I'm doing or anything. I mean, I don't even know if God likes what I'm doing, but I can say that sometimes I'm sure God doesn't like what I'm doing. I can make mistakes. But anyway, so what I'm saying is this hostility towards God. It starts off with, okay, first he hated Cain. The next thing you know, he kills Cain, and he didn't want Cain around because God had loved Cain or whatever. I'm sorry, loved Abel. And so then we go to this same idea of, if you're against God, then you want to be against everything God stands for. And one of the things we know God stands for is life. One of the 10 commandments, do not murder. And so if you're against God, you say, okay, well, now I find abortion pleasant because I'm in control of somebody else's life rather than God being in control of that person's life. And the same thing is, these people are talking about suicide or allowing euthanasia and all this kind of stuff. And some people are having euthanasia just because they're depressed and young and healthy otherwise. But we're seeing that kind of stuff where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to stick it to God because I don't agree with him. So I'm going to devalue life, or take somebody's life, or take my own life, or take a baby's life inside of me. And so, and then it plays out with a lot of other things that these people do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I even think that it's really the primary motivation, I think, in a lot of ways. And to an extent, I actually praise God for that, because I have recently seen, I don't know your own experience, I guess, so I can only speak for my own, but 2020, while it was certainly the year that everybody became politically anxious and the year certain families were split, and the year people stopped becoming friends, and the year people lost their jobs, and all this other sort of stuff. One of the things that I noticed is it is also, at least in my own personal group, the year where a lot of people were like, maybe there's something to this whole God thing. Maybe it is that these people who are so anti-God actually are evil, and they actually do have influences that are against. And then, of course, they start looking at themselves like, oh, wow, that's me. I'm a God hater. I'm a non-believer. I'm a Jack Christian, whatever it happens to be, right? And while I can't say definitively that I've gotten any of the people who I know, and to be fair, it wouldn't be me anyways, it would be the Holy Spirit. But while I can't say definitively that I know for a fact that there's these groups of people now who are going to be going to church as a result of our conversations, I do know, like 8 or 9 people off the top of my head who that's a very real possibility in the coming weeks, right? Not months, not years, but weeks. They're going to be like, all right, I drop it all. I believe, I give my life to God. And it has a lot to do with this shout your abortion movement, with, 6 months of riots, with, endorsing things like communism and stuff like that. Because when people see those things now, and don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people stay there, right? They stay political Christians. They never truly become repentant. But for a lot of people, you do end up seeing, that they see that and they're like, wow, I guess this is all true. And especially when you get to like some of the prophetic parts, you know what I mean? Like when you look at like the reestablishment of Israel, right? Now, obviously that's not our timeline, but it's pretty close. And you talk to, a non-believer about, okay, well, let me ask you a question. Has Rome ever been reestablished? What about Egypt? And Egypt's a fun one because they'll say, oh, well, Egypt exists. And it's like, yeah, but does it really? Right? Those are Arabs. They speak Arabic. Their religion is Islam. There's no Pharaoh, right? They're not genetically the same, linguistically the same, culturally the same. They're just different people. They might call it Egypt, but that's not the same thing.
That's interesting. I haven't looked into that. I've never heard that. I never really even thought of that. So,
well, yeah, and it's an interesting thing, actually. It's a fun fact. God tells numerous nations they will never rebuild. One of them being Assyria, another one being Egypt. And thanks to Muhammad and Islam, which I'm not actually attacking them for this. They actually, I think, did the will of the Lord in this particular example. But that's exactly right. They never will rebuild. Syria, which is where the Assyrians lived, is Arab territory now, where they speak Arabic, where they write in Arabic, where the culture is Arabic. You know what I mean? And the Assyrians still live there, sort of. There's like 400,000 of them. There used to be over 1.5 million. But they won't ever rebuild, right? They can't rebuild. And part of that is, of course, proof positive of God's own prophecies. But another part of it that I think is very important is to show just how amazing it really is. Israel is reestablished, right?
Yeah.
After, 1,878 years, Israel is a nation again.
Yeah.
And it's Jewish people in the right land with the right city, even. And
their original language.
Yeah, you're right. No kidding.
They actually lost the language. That was resurrected in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's amazing, right? It's this incredible thing. But then you start looking at that and you tell people who are non-religious or even the God haters a lot of times, you'll talk to them about this, and especially when you get the one-on-one, I do notice it's really difficult for people to rationalize this stuff in their head, which is good, right? It should be difficult for them because you can't rationalize it, right? There's no reason for the Jewish people to have their own state, and yet they do. There's no reason for it. Just as another clear example, right? We just saw in the 70-year anniversary of Israel's existence, the recognition of Jerusalem as their capital, right? There's just no reason for that. It defies all geopolitics, right? It defies all political philosophy. It defies the need of human beings to want to make peace with each other. Mm-hmm. And yet here we are, right? And it's one of those things where it's like it gets really difficult, I think, for people to deny, not only when they see all the evil, but then when they couple that with the fact that prophecy is very clearly coming to pass. And it's coming to pass before our lifetime, in our lifetime, and I think there's a great awakening right now, I think.
I agree. And actually, in case anybody isn't familiar with this, go read the book of Daniel and how the end times are spoken of and Israel's referenced. And so when Israel was gone for 1878 years, that must have been difficult for Jewish people or Christian people to kind of reconcile. Well, wait a second. Daniel says there's going to be an Israel. This is kind of strange. There's no Israel. And so for all those years and for many lifetimes, and then suddenly it comes back. And so it's truly amazing. I want to go back to something you said. You just kind of made quick mention. And I want to say hi to everybody in the chat too. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming in here today. Love to see you guys, and it's always great to see everyone. And if anyone wants to get on my chat sometime, just send me an email, alwayslearning1225@gmail.com, and we can make that happen. Okay, so what I was going to say is you touched on communism, and I am a major non-fan of communism because I love the idea of individualism. I think that subordinating and an individual to a group, the desires of a group or the goals of a group, I think is anti-human. And I think that what happens with communism, as we know from the last century, 120 million people starved and perished or were killed. And so under the communist regimes in USSR, China, and Cambodia. And so I look at the communism and I really worry about when people start thinking, especially young people these days, they start thinking that socialism, which is the collective ownership of the goods, the means of production. I think that this idea of socialism is extremely dangerous. And so, and I'm saying that because it is funny. I actually considered myself left-leaning Democrat and am a registered Democrat, but there's certain things that I really don't like about the way the party is currently tipping further and further to the left. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. That's my view. If you disagree, that's fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do actually agree completely. I think personally, now, I do want to say beforehand, as a disclaimer, because I do want to, offer the respect to all of my independent and liberal friends, right? Which of course would include you in this instance if you would consider yourself to be a little bit more classically liberal. I do certainly, however, believe that this is kind of the inevitable landing place of certain ideologies accepted within American liberalism. Certainly not all. In fact, a lot of ideas within American liberalism are considered conservative today, which is like free speech, for example. That's absolutely a liberal concept. It's not a conservative concept, if in the traditional sense. In the American sense, it is because of our Constitution. But all that sort of aside, though, I think, like, for example, right, we would talk a lot in the 60s as a nation, right, about this idea of the sort of losing my train of thought a minute. Got it back. There we go. About this idea of getting the government involved in, your family matters, and in ways that seemed like they're liberating. So, for example, you have a woman who's in a relationship that maybe it's not necessarily abusive, but the dude never talks to her, never touches her, never says anything nice to her, and oftentimes has something pretty mean to say. Well, in the modern day, it's relatively easy for that girl to get out of that relatively terrible situation by means of a no-fault based divorce. And that was, it was something that was pushed by the Democratic Party for that reason, because that example exists. I mean, everybody on the planet knows somebody who's lived that example. Maybe it's a man or maybe it's a woman, but the point is we've all seen it. But the thing is what that now sets up this precedent of, well, you can just get divorced. You just can, right? And we have Kim Kardashian and Chris Humphries, right, where they were married for all of 72 days, and something like 50 of those days were spent trying to work on the divorce. You know what I mean?
Seriously? I didn't know. I haven't been following Kardashians.
Yeah, it was back in like 2012 or something like that. I can't remember when she married Chris Humphries, but my mom used to watch the Keeping Up with the Kardashian show, and I was only 14 at the time. 13, something like that. And I kid you not, it was a 72-day marriage, and over half of the marriage was spent trying to annul the marriage.
Marriage is hard. I mean, people don't really, I've been married now since 2003, 17 years now, coming up on 18 years. And it's not all, it was really, I remember first when we were dating, it was just this fun fantasy. It was like I was living in a honeymoon, and then you get married, and then you still have the honeymoon, usually probably about the first year, maybe even first 2 years. And then you just start getting into normalcy, and it's just, okay, you're the husband. You got to remember, you have to be appreciative. You have to do those things, but you have some ups and downs. It doesn't always, it's not that easy necessarily. And so, and I think that people do take it not as seriously as they took it in the Bible, as Jesus took it. It's this union between a man and a woman that no one's supposed to break apart. And so it would take, what I would advise for younger people, if anyone's listening to this and you're not married like yourself, you're single, take a while before you pick out who you marry. That's the big thing. Make sure you marry the right person in the first place. That helps.
Well, and what I would also say too is what I would sort of speak to all the non-married is change your perspective on dating. Dating ends one of two ways. You will die with that person, or you will break up with that person, or of course they will die with you. It kind of depends on, I guess, who passes first. But the point being, right, that there's no third option. Anytime you get in a relationship with people, the third option is just not real. So I think it would behoove people to understand that, and understand every time they do get in these kind of relationships that, hey, I am potentially making a huge decision. And I would even go as far as to say, if you don't, lay the gravity of the situation there, I think in a lot of instances you can't possibly understand A, the commitment that you're actually making, but also B, the level of damage that you can do, right? Like, I can say, as somebody who grew up in a split household, and I was 9 when my parents split, I've had some pretty rough, I would even consider traumatic experiences in my life, and none of them are compared to the splitting of my parents. That's obviously my own personal experience, but I've been in fights with gangsters and in juvenile hall and taking a bunch of drugs and not to get too deep into stuff, but even like abused as a child and stuff like that. And yet the thing that I can still think back to this day as the very worst event that ever took place in my life, it was the splitting of my parents. Right. In fact, a lot of the stuff I did even came from the splitting of my parents. Like, for example, the drugs. Right. That was a way of trying to just numb myself so I didn't have to deal with life anymore. Getting involved with all these fights and stuff like that. Well, I was a very angry person, and I wanted to be associated with people who were angry and who were, willing to damage others and that sort of stuff. Those events being traumatic in and of themselves are even in the end based in the fact that I had split parents. And what is that whole thing based in? It's based in the fact that my parents did not, in specific, I guess I shouldn't get into specifics. It's not my business, but nonetheless, they didn't take it seriously enough, right? At least one of the two didn't take it seriously enough, and now they're split, and the family is destroyed, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Then, of course, you have the damage done to the parties themselves, right? The inability to trust another person, the inability to actually get close with another person, the psychological trauma you have to go through of the why isn't it, or why wasn't it good enough, rather, and all this other sort of stuff. You know what I mean? And it's like this. I guess the long and short is, because I don't want to ramble, there is a very, very brutal consequence to splitting up. And even splitting up when you're dating, there ends up being brutal consequence. But when you're married, and especially if you have kids, it is just 9 times worse. And so I always kind of suggest to people, look, when you get into these relationships, you need to understand you are either marrying this person, right, or passing away, something along those lines, or you guys are going to split, which is almost guaranteed to not be a good thing. You're right. John Peterson famously said, not famously, but it's famous in my mind. There's a reason that they're your ex. There's probably some bad.
Excuse me.
Yeah, bless you.
Thank you. No, I've been meaning to sneeze. I agree with you. I think it's really, really hard on the kids. And I look at my own parents who are together and as an example of what love can do. They've been together now 54 years. And my mom, unfortunately, now has developed this Lewy body dementia where she's barely able to talk anymore. And my dad's become her caretaker. And I look at this kind of love that he has for her and what he does for her now. She used to be the one who did all the cleaning and did all the dishes and all that kind of stuff. And she made all the dinners, and she sent all the cards to the grandkids and that. And now he's taken over all of those roles. And unfortunately, she sleeps probably, he says, 20 out of 24 hours every day. She's kind of, and I haven't been able to see her because of COVID, and they're waiting to get vaccinated so we can come see them. Mm-hmm. But they don't want us coming there until they get vaccinated. They're very, my dad is very worried about COVID. But I look at that and I say to myself, they've certainly had ups and downs, and I've had ups and downs, and we just have to you just have to remember, okay, we got together. And that's the promise you had in the beginning. The very first thing that we said to each other was, we're committed, through sickness and in health, till death do us part. That's what we promised each other. And I think keeping that promise is important. I think you're a good example. Maybe somebody can, now maybe through their example, your parents' example, that, hey, I actually am going to value marriage. And maybe when you find the right person and, you go ahead and do that, you want to make sure you find somebody also on your same page as far as, we're going to value this commitment, even if we get sick or even if something happens. So.
Well, and one thing that I kind of can say from my own experience, because actually I actually am married. 2 years. I got married when I was 20. I know that seems a little young, but I had been in a relationship with the girl since I was 15.
Oh, wait, you're
Um,
married right now?
yes, ma'am.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, congratulations. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh no, that's certainly all right. I tend to keep that on the DL. Um, but one thing that I've noticed about, because we did sort of have that same level of, this isn't going to be a thing as far as divorce. In fact, we even collectively agreed that there are 3 things and 3 things only that will even lead that to be a conversation. And it is abandonment by one or the other, abuse by one or the other, or adultery by one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Barring those 3 things, it's not even up for dispute. And even in those 3 things, I can say, kind of happily, not that it's ever had to be used or anything like that, but there is a level of understanding to where, like, for example, if an adultery were to happen, I don't know that would kill it. I think there might be a level of forgiveness strong enough at this point to where we might even be able to get over that. I'm not sure. That'd be something that would have to be crossed once we got there. Unfortunately, if we got there, Lord willing, we do not.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Right. Exactly. But it's sort of just this benefit, I guess, for a lack of a better term, huge boom to the relationship, because it's just this understanding of like, no, we're in this for the long haul. We got married at 20. The average life expectancy is 80 and up and going up, right, with the advent of technology. So we are in this for the long run. And one thing I'll say that's pretty cool about it, I've actually gotten to see the not 100% of it quite yet, but the if you marry an unbeliever, they may be sanctified through the believing spouse.
Yeah.
Not quite there yet, but just about right around the corner on that one. And that's pretty cool also.
Oh, so your spouse is a non-believer, or?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. So that, yeah, you can, I'm encouraged by what it says in Corinthians.
Right.
So I think that's good. So I did want to, John Maddox has been making all kinds of good points here. He says that, and also I want to thank Sal for praying for my mom. I really appreciate that. And, but John says that his dad got shot in the neck in Vietnam. Every Mother's Day anniversary, he gets all choked up because of all the men whose wives left them. And that's always so tragic, especially these war heroes who go to war, come back, and maybe they come back and the wives have taken off. And so that's tragic. And so, I want to circle back, because this also, we're getting back to our little atheism topic. The non-believer, see, that's the other thing. When you don't believe in God, a lot of times some of them might say, well, God likes the institution of marriage. Therefore, I did a survey on Twitter, put it this way. I did a survey on Twitter and I looked at Christians and versus atheists on whether or not they believe polyamory is okay, which is the idea that consensual relationships with other people outside of marriage, even though you're in a marriage, is the polyamory idea. And I noticed that quite a few atheists wrote back that they thought polyamory is perfectly fine. I think. And that's therein lies the rub. That those kinds of things that they want to go against what God says in so many ways, and God does not appreciate a polyamorous relationship. And the ones that I've seen actually in real life, those people ended up divorced. And so I don't know what you thought on that kind of stuff.
No, I completely agree. In fact, I think I can't remember who it is that had said it, but I remember somebody saying that polyamory is only polyamory for one of the two parties. For the other party, it's cheating, and they just won't admit it. And I think that's pretty fairly accurate. You know what I mean? Because there are a lot of people who would like begrudgingly, all right, I mean, fine, I'll go along with it. You know what I mean? Like, and they might even enjoy some of the sexual hedonism that they'd even get from it. But in the end, it's like they're not happy with it. One thing, so I'm really involved in the anti-porn movement, and one thing that is always noted about the pornography movement is that how little marriages sex workers have that end up being successful. I mean, I think the average sex worker's marriage is something like 5 years, which is just horrible. You know what I mean? Like that's I know multiple teenagers, plural teenagers, who have dated for longer than 5 years. You know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of a big positive, not positive, proof positive to that point of like, this really, it's not the way we were designed. It's not the way that we work. We're one man, one woman, kind of a species designed in the image of God, right? He has his one body and we have our one God, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that is going to be bigger and bigger. I think I actually tend to believe that I will live to see the day when marriage is actually taboo, kind of. Maybe not taboo, but definitely not the norm. I think that I will definitely live to see that day. In fact, to be honest with you, I have a pretty strong feeling that even like my grandparents might live to see that day, who are in their 70s, right? Meaning it could be
Yeah.
coming around any second.
It's I'll tell you what, that is going on in Europe, and so we've seen that for example, when I went over to Europe, in 2003, and for one of the times I've been there a few times, but I went over there, and did I? No, I've actually only been there 2 times. But I went over to Germany, and I was with some relatives, and we were hanging out. And I remember my relative was dating this guy, and I said to her, "Was he the one? Is he the one?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's probably the one, but we're not going to get married. People just don't really get married anymore around here." And that's the whole thing. Germany and a lot of these northern and western European countries are moving increasingly secular, and part of that secularism is the idea of the sanctity of marriage is no more for them. So many of them don't even bother getting married, and they don't want to do that. Those are things that we're seeing, and I really also appreciate that you said you're anti-porn, because I am too. I really don't want my kids getting messed up with that. And from what I can see online, a lot of people are really addicted to it. I mean, they're serious addicts. So
Well, it's actually, I will be willing or not willing. I'll be honest to I don't know why I got the word willing there. Anyways, I'll be honest with the people here. It's, you look at the numbers, right? So for example, Pornhub will actually give you the numbers if you look for them of who watches what, and then how often they watch it and all this other sort of stuff. And of course, they won't give like details of like names and stuff, but the gender and the age and sexual orientation and things of that nature. And one of the things that you notice when you actually go through these numbers is that virtually everybody who, and I don't say this necessarily to particulars, this is a general statement, and so obviously there's going to be certain people it won't apply to, but with confidence I can usually say virtually everybody who watches pornography, even if they won't tell you about it, because the numbers don't lie, right? There's only so many people in the United States. A large majority of, not a large majority, a large portion of them are children, right? So if you remove those 10 and unders from the situation and look at the gross number of humans there are in the United States, and then the gross number of people who have Pornhub accounts, there's just no way that people are living in these communities where it's just not a big deal. And if you think about it, it makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, here you go, right? Here's this cell phone. It's got a lot of really, really awesome things about it. But one of the worst things about it is that particular drug is 24/7 open to you. You just got to click and you're done, right? And
yeah, it's dangerous.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. It's all horrible how easy the access is, and I haven't looked at Pornhub stats, but I wanted to. I think I saw somebody post one time that said that unfortunately there's a lot of the stuff going on in the Bible Belt, which is not. What is the gender and what is the breakdown that the Pornhub says?
So it is primarily males who watch pornography. Now it's growing more and more, and actually Pornhub will note that a lot of females who make accounts, first off, females a lot of times won't make accounts, and second off, a lot of times if they do, they'll lie, simply because it is still somewhat taboo for women to be sexual in that nature. Praise God, right? But
yeah.
So the numbers right now are certainly mostly men. Roughly 2/3 of watchers are men. It's 150 from the States alone. It's 150 million a day. People are on that website.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that is insane.
Yeah, it is truly insane. Like the amount of people who actually watch pornography in this country is unbelievable. And it's to the point where, like I said, you can almost guarantee that you just know somebody who does it as an addictive thing, as a daily thing, even, you know what I mean? Not because of anybody who, you may have thought that way about, but just because there's not that many people in the States, right? There's not that many people in the world. And you do see too, that a lot of the stuff people are getting into as well. And this is one thing that the statistics will show you, are just not savory at all. And you know, I don't want to get too crass about it, but just to give some examples, right? I think it's 76%, if I'm not mistaken, it might be 73% of males who watch pornography have their number one topic, not a number one topic, but the number one topic being teens. And the number two topic being family, stepsisters, stepmothers, things of that nature. Which means, and again, not to be too blunt, but what that means is the likelihood that you know somebody who is interested in teenage girls having sex with their teenage stepbrothers is 100%. You know,
oh my gosh, really? That's got that. Oh, that's disgusting.
it is. It's a horrifying thing, but it's, you know, the numbers don't lie. This is what they have, and other things are on the rise too. Group sex used to be something that was primarily just males, and it wasn't all males. It was roughly 44% of males. It is now something that, first off, men and women are roughly neck and neck. They tend to like different kinds, obviously, because, you know, men are going to be attracted to women and women are going to be attracted to men. But group sex now is a very popular thing, and so popular, in fact, that people are trying it outside of pornography. And, you know, and so on and so forth, really. Like, you can go on with, you know, I personally had a lot of these problems myself, and I can say with confidence that I didn't even, you know, a lot of times I didn't even have to look for this sort of stuff. It was just what was advertised. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean,
It's
it's sad. You know what it is it's a trailing off in society. It's a degradation of society, and it's interesting because it's almost like you can see satanic actions behind a lot of the things that we're seeing right now. The crumbling of the marriage and this idea of exalting. Like I see a lot of people saying we should legalize prostitution, and I'm like, no, if you legalize it, it's only going to increase it, just like porn is legal. So it's increased. If we've got 150 million people daily tuning into porn, I mean, what in the world is going on with our society? That's just got to be cracking down on people's inner values and what they know is right. And it's completely going against God.
Yeah, it is 100%. And it's even, you know, it's interesting. We have this society, I think, that it kind of almost in a way worships female sexuality. It seems to be what they've replaced God with, is the idea of really, and you know, the reason I bring that up is because, you know, the pornography is obviously a huge deal. But one thing that I have began to notice, and I hope that we have people noticing it more, because I don't want to say it in judgment. I want people to come out of it, right? And I know there are people out there who are like, you know, no, we need to go out and, you know, stone prostitutes and things like that. And, you know, that certainly is not the case over yonder, right?
Well, Jesus hung out with prostitutes. I mean, it wasn't like that's the thing. We're not supposed to, the people who are in those things, the sex workers, the online sex workers, that's a big thing too. And there's a lot of women who are doing that right now on these little OnlyFans accounts and those kind of things. And they say, well, we should be able to do this. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly legal. We should be able to do what we want with our bodies. And, you know, I don't disagree with them, but the problem is the access that other people like little kids can get to this stuff. And so I'm not trying to, you know, I don't want to act like I'm high and mighty and, you know, I'm so wonderful, I wouldn't be a sex worker. No, I'm empathizing with those people who've made those choices, feeling that they don't have another use for their body.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that too. And I would even say too, that this kind of the point I was going to make there with the sort of what I've sort of seen as a worship of female sexuality almost, is like, you know, you see things like a Nicki Minaj music video, right? And I've made this comment recently to a couple of buddies of mine. You know, you don't even need the pornography at this point. You can just watch her music video. You're right. She's throwing around all of her assets and you know, wearing incredibly provocative clothing. Because, you know, I mean, and that's even another thing I've noticed too. I was recently looking through for like you know, gifts for, you know, different people for Christmas, right? And one of the things that comes up when you go to a clothing website for women is bikinis, right? And I kid you not, there were bikinis there that I was looking at that I thought to myself, that this is the sort of thing that I would expect to walk into a strip club and see a stripper wearing. Right?
Yeah, like the thong bikinis.
Yeah, exactly. Or like the ones that like strap all over your chest so that it emphasizes and pulls up your chest and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And it's like, this is what you expect teenagers to go swimming in with their friends, many of whom are male, right? That's absurd to me. And it shows really that there's this thing in society now where we almost expect that of young girls. I mean, even down to like the clothing. I know people stopped talking about clothing in like the 50s, but if you've ever like considered things like short shorts and yoga pants and stuff like that, right? They're entirely sexual in design. And you know, as a young girl, you can imagine how that would be. You know, you everything from the makeup you wear to your wardrobe to the things you're going to go out in bikinis to every single celebrity who you happen to adore is telling you you need to be very pretty and very sexual and very sexually independent and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And I personally think it's societal abuse on young girls. I really do. Because I don't think they end up even, you know, properly understanding the damage that it does to them before they end up jumping right into it. You know, and I remember talking to, you know, girls when I was in high school who had hit double digits in men plus women as far as a body count is concerned. You know what I mean? And that is something that is very, you know, it's horrifying, really, because there's no way that person, having been used that many times by many people, feels good about themselves. You know what I mean? That's a tortured soul, and that's a tortured soul that I think society has basically caused to be tortured. And it goes back to exactly what you're saying there, right? It's this hatred of God says that he wants people to be modest, so we're going to wear immodest clothing. God says that we want to be married, so we're going to break down the marriage. And God said we're going to value women as people and value sexuality as something that is between a relationship, specifically man and woman who are married, right? Well, sorry, none of those things. And it really is. It's just constantly, you can go down the line, right? All these things where you just see this huge and intense God hatred.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to comment on a couple of things. One is logical, plausible, probable. That's John. He says, those stupid yoga pants that all women are wearing now, those things are ridiculous, nearly impossible to not stare.
Well, and it's
I have yoga pants downstairs, but I always, if I wear them anywhere, if I even bring them out in public, I actually always wear it with a shirt that goes over my backside, so it doesn't,
right.
You know, because I'm kind of modest person. I don't want to, you know, I don't see it. Plus, I'm old. I'm not going to walk around that anyway. But I did want to think about going to the bikini thing. I came from Southeast Florida, and I lived down in Southeast Florida for 21 years. And I had many years partying with my friends down there, having just a really fun time. And we would go into these places like Shooters on the Water in Fort Lauderdale, which is this really fun restaurant. And they had bikini contests all the time. Like, you know, every Saturday you'd go to Shooters and there was a bikini contest, and the women would wear like the only like a string, like they barely had anything covering themselves. Mm-hmm. And they would be up there in these really super high heels walking, you know, and the men would be ogling. And I mean, looking back on that at the time, I didn't really think much of it, but now I look back on it, I'm kind of like, ooh, what you know, it's kind of like, that's not, what message are you sending with the women who have barely any clothes on? You know, I think about, that's a family restaurant. You could bring your kids there, and what would your kids see when they see that stuff? So,
well, you know, technically you can bring your kids to Hooters. Actually, I mean, I never actually. It's a good thing my dad ended up being there and saying, yeah, you know, we're not gonna do this. I don't even want to eat here by myself, let alone with my children. But there's been times where, you know, my dad's been hanging out with his friends and they've, you know, let's just all go to Hooters, and it's like, well, no. How's about not? You know what I mean? We have children in the car. I mean, at the time I was only like 11, 12 years old. But it is, you know, it is, I think it's a very important thing. And to go to Maddox's point too, about, you know, the whole nearly impossible to not stare thing, you know, on one end, of course, is I will always say that as a Christian, the Bible does say very clearly to even look upon another woman with lust is to commit adultery with her in your own heart. And so I don't say that, Maddox, to condemn, but just to actually encourage you that the Lord does not like that sort of thing. Always remind yourself of that if you're in that situation. And of course that applies to me and any other man really out there. And even a lot of the women out there too. I mean, women obviously have lust as well. But also we do need to, you know, we always need to remember the Bible says that offenses must come, but woe unto them by whom the offense cometh. And you know, I think that's something we have often laid aside in our modern world, and especially when it pertains to those sorts of things, right? If you're leading people into temptation and sin, that in and of itself is considered sin, right? And I, of course, would not use that in any way to justify men ogling women or anything like that, but just to say that this is certainly, it is a two-way street that we have here. You know,
absolutely. I mean? That's a good point.
And I hope that more people start to realize it, because it is true that there, everything within your nature as a man wants to look at, a girl who looks attractive, right? Especially if she's emphasizing, more sexual parts. But likewise, everything that is in a woman does want to be ogled, right? It wants to be considered a beautiful person. And there are things that I think we both should have grace with each other on, but also we should both, be willing to kind of call each other out on to an extent. If we see a Christian sister in a pair of short shorts, just take her aside and be like, hey, maybe this isn't the best thing for yourself. Maybe this isn't the best thing for a temple of God. Maybe this isn't something that will help you on even some of the sisters, right? Who knows? I mean, a lot of people struggle with homosexuality these days. The same thing with a guy. You see some man out there with, and this is one thing I do think we do forget entirely in the modern society, and it kind of drives me crazy. But you see a man out there walking in his tight muscle shirt or no shirt at all. You know what I mean? Again, same thing, right? Take him aside. Hey, that may not be particularly beneficial to the sisters. They lust as well. Hey, maybe it's not a good thing to degrade your body, a literal temple of the Lord, simply because it's hot outside or whatever. And I would just encourage people to try and be more, serious about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're pointing out a couple of things that are really important, is this idea of the temple of the Lord, and made in God's image, and how much we're expected to treat our bodies correctly. And so that speaks to a lot of the other things that people do today to change their bodies, or to do, different things. And so or to use their bodies in ways that are sexually promiscuous and that kind of stuff. That's actually probably the worst sin, according to the way that, as far as when I read the Bible, of all the types of sins that people can commit, the sexual issues, that tends to keep coming up. So.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple of reasons for it too. I mean, obviously the Bible plainly says that he who commits sin of a sexual nature commits sin against his own body. Whereas, if you, for example, murder somebody, that is a sin that's entirely against somebody else. And that's a big portion of it for sure. And I think also a big portion of it is the fact that your body is to be a temple of the Holy Spirit, which is God, right? Mm-hmm. But I also think, it's an interesting thing. The Bible does call both Israel and the church brides of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. And I've always kind of looked at, sex and marriage and all those sorts of things as they really are, in a way, the number one representation of our relationship with God. Not that we're literally doing anything perverse with God, but that relationship you have with a spouse, that literally, creates one flesh betwixt the two of you in the form of a child, right? Mm-hmm. That is the same sort of relationship, at least in the relationship status, right? In the amount of respect and of love and of reverence that you have for someone, that God with his people. Mm-hmm. And, and I think it makes those kinds of things particularly egregious, right? Like adultery isn't just the sinning against your own body. It isn't just disparaging the temple of the Lord. It isn't just harming another brother or sister of the Lord, right? But on top of that, it's also taking God's representation of his own relationship with man and spitting on it. You know what I mean? And I think to a certain extent, that almost is like you said, the biggest one in a lot of ways, barring, of course, the obvious, which is just, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul.
Yeah, no, I think that is one of the biggest ones. And I also want to say hi to everybody in the chat. I just want to go out on there. I see Hate, Love, Nothing, and Tim Ott, and Logically Plausible, Probable, which is John, and Rachel Ends. It's always good to see all of you guys. And so, no, that's the whole thing. It's very, very important to God that we keep we're pure that way. I mean, the whole idea, it's funny. I was mentioning it yesterday in my little channel, but I was Jonathan Haidt's work when he talks about moral foundations theory, and he looks at the distinction between Democrats and Republicans in certain ways. Democrats value care and they value fairness, but they don't really place much value on authority, sanctity, or liberty, or loyalty. And so you can see when Trump was doing what he did with all the patriots and the patriotism and the flags and that kind of stuff, that completely speaks to Republicans, because Republicans actually value all of those foundations more equally. And so in the idea of purity and sanctity is something that, of course, there's variations in the group, but it just happens to be more Republicans place more emphasis on all of those things than the Democrats. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And so Um, and I think that aligns with things like the authority and this idea of God as the authority. And so a lot of people want to buck authority. A lot of atheists had bad relationships with their father. I've seen, I guess there's a book on that somebody actually looked at some famous atheists and their father relationships. And so that's an authority figure. And so maybe they just can't see themselves coming to God because of that. They reject the authority.
Well, and I certainly think that has a lot to do with it too. And I also think, with this, the question that was sort of started to, that was asked rather to start this whole conversation, right, was, can we get along? And, it is an interesting thing. I do think that to some extent, the answer is yes. But actually, I think in the ultimate sense, the answer really is no. And I do believe that is God's own will, really, to try and separate sheep from the goats, so to speak, right? Now, I do believe that we absolutely, as Christians, we should always assume that the answer will be yes, because it is simply not our place to be, to be condemning and chastising and stoning and those sorts of things. But there's something to be said, I think, about the complete and total rejection of Christ as Lord, and the complete and total rejection even of a God figure in general. Which, although, I guess I won't say that too deeply, because you could totally be a Muslim and still be outside of Christ. But oh shoot, I lost my train of thought again. I'm sorry.
No, but what you're saying was somebody just the complete rejection.
Right. Thank you. So it basically, it's like this, you can't, you look at Romans 1, right? And you look at just basic human behavior, right? Or when God talks about, you can't serve two masters, right? Those are really very plain truths, right? And I think when you've dedicated yourself to the disregard, really, of Scripture and disregard of sanctity of life and things of that nature, right? I just think God truly does let you live in your own sin. And as somebody who lives in the muck, I think you get offended at those who want to pull you out. They appear to be high and mighty. They obviously serve the Lord, and that's not something that you're interested in doing. And honestly, I even think it'll get worse. I don't know for a fact that persecution will befall the United States. I tend to believe it probably will. I personally am a premillennialist. But I think that in order to weed out some of the escapism, that the rapture will probably happen after some pretty severe persecution in the West. Because frankly, if you're not the kind of person who would be willing to go through persecution, you're not the kind of person who got a rapture, right? Not that that's the topic of this conversation, but just to sort of lay out a little bit of.
No, I agree with you. I think it is going to get worse. I mean, one of the things that I was noticing think about this now, since I think I got on Facebook in 2007 or 2008. That's when I remember social media coming about, and I got on Twitter in 2010, but I ignored the account for 4 years and then created another account. But the reason I'm pointing those out is because one of the things that those things do is they bring together disparate groups and disparate people, and they in different ways. Like, people end up saying, let's say you're an atheist in the United States, where only 3.1% identify as atheists. Okay. I think it's another 4% identify as agnostics. So say you're in that camp of about 7% of the people. And you're in a community where you don't really want to say outwardly that you're an atheist. Maybe you don't want to tell your family that you're an atheist. So you go online and you find all these people on Twitter and YouTube and places like that, and you feel like suddenly you've got this community, and so you become more vocal. And then they talk about how they come out to their families. I mean, I've seen all kinds of atheists saying my deconversion story and that sort of thing. And so social media actually has done us a tremendous disservice because of bringing more people saying that they're atheists. I'll bet you the atheist, a person who's Christian and sits there and looks at Matt Dillahunty and says, "Oh boy, maybe I can reject my Christianity. I never really gave that much thought," and starts watching, religiously every Sunday at 5:00 or whatever time he gets on his Atheist Experience show and starts talking about how saying "I don't know" is perfectly reasonable. If you don't know the answer, the right thing to do is say "I don't know." so they think, oh, this is a good crowd. I'll just hang out with these people. And so, and I remember I had Shannon Q on my channel, and she's like, "I want to normalize atheism." That's what she said. And I've had the other one, Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. does the same thing. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I actually thought you had finished, but it turns out it was a lag on my part, so I apologize for that. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying what they do is like they bring a very normal face to atheism, and they want to bring people into their fold. But the interesting thing is atheism doesn't have anything on its face to offer anybody. So they can offer the community that they have, but they don't have like it doesn't explain our morality, our meaning, our purpose, our destiny. It doesn't explain a lot of things that are really critical to our lives.
Well, and actually too, I don't think in the end it'll win out. If my understanding of eschatology is correct, then I do actually believe that the Antichrist will be a religious person, basically. I even think he'll probably end up being a Catholic Pope. I wouldn't be as bold as to claim Pope Francis. Yeah, actually, so I've been going through a lot of Revelation, as well as excuse me, wow, I cannot speak. What some of the early church fathers and the reformers had to say about end times, and it seems to me like a proper understanding of Revelation 17. Not only does it point to the Catholic Church, but I don't actually think it's possible for you to conclude anything but the Catholic Church. And now I know a lot of people are, I mean, Revelation is a super difficult book to read. So that's one of the reasons that I think people don't typically see that. But like, so for example, Revelation 17 says that that John beheld what he called the great whore of Babylon, right? Well, women are always representative of believers in the Bible, always, right? In Hosea, the believers are Gomer, who are continuously leaving, right? It's like Israel, you continuously leave, yet I come back because of my mercy, right? That's what God's saying. In Ezekiel, it's once again talking about Israel as the child who the Lord raised, and then eventually switching from the child that he raised to a different relationship of like the married couple. And you see, obviously, the Eve comes out of Adam, right? And so that's led a lot of people to, to think of potentially, the out of God and those sorts of things, right? And I think, sorry, I just read Danny's. I wonder if that's the same Danny that I talked to. I think it is, because he says he's talked to me before.
Danny could be male or female. I can't tell from the picture, or the name can go both ways. I don't know if.
Yeah, he's if that's the same Danny that I think it is, he's just got a different picture. Usually, I'm familiar with him having like a tree or something like that. But nonetheless, not important. He says yes.
He says it is him. Okay.
For sure. Yeah, Danny's actually a pretty cool dude. I'm not gonna lie. He's one of my favorite atheists to talk to.
Well, we'll have to line it up. Maybe we can line up, because I don't have as much time today, because we're coming up on almost an hour and a half. But I was thinking maybe we can set something up where we get some atheist representation in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not gonna lie though. I was already sort of derailing my thoughts, and then I read that. Now I completely derailed my thought. But that's okay. That's okay.
No, I think I got caught up. And I'd like to get logical, plausible, probable on here too. So, and Sal back in here. Anyone who wants to come on, again, if you guys email me at alwayslearning1225@gmail.com. And if you guys want to come on here, we can set something up.
Oh, hang on. I do recall actually what I was talking about. So, so you look at Revelation 17, right? It has this great whore, right? And you continue down the line. It's like I said, you have Gomer, then you have the bride of Christ, right? And all this other sort of stuff. Paul says, I have betrothed you to one husband, right? So women are constantly representative of the believers, right? Whether that be Israel or the church. So logically, a whore, being a fallen woman, would be a fallen believer, right? So that leads us either to Israel or the church. We're down to two options already, right? But then it says that the woman sits upon a beast with 7 heads, and that the 7 heads are 7 hills on which the city, which is the whore, sits on, right? Well, if you say the city on 7 hills to a first century audience, it would be like saying the Big Apple to a 21st century audience. It'd be like, oh, well, that's Rome, obviously, right? That's just what we call it. And just the same way you'd be like, oh, Big Apple? Well, that's New York. So what the book of Revelation is actually saying, that Revelation 17, is that there's going to be a fallen group of believers in Rome who's leading the Antichrist system. or the beast, as it's called in Revelation. And I think that, in my opinion at least, leaves us no other option. It's got to be the Roman Catholic Church, because that's the big body of believers that exists within Rome.
You know, I've never thought of that coming out of Rome. I've never. So did you hear, where did you get this idea, 7 hills in Rome? Where did that, is that written down somewhere that?
Well, so let me clarify. Do you mean that the city of 7 hills is Rome, or that in Revelation it calls it that?
Yeah, is that what you're saying? Is it that the ancients would say that the city of 7 hills is Rome?
Yeah. So that Rome was actually founded by a collection of, it was 7 city-states that were each sort of centered on a hill, and they came together and formed Rome. And so it was the city of 7 hills was that, that city that was this collection of these 7 separate city-states. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pull up, actually, just so I can give people a source. But city.
No, I believe you, because when I saw that, I've been reading Revelation 2 and trying to figure out what's going on. And I had always thought that the Mahdi out of the Muslim faith was going to be the Antichrist. And so I had been building a theory around that. But that actually, your theory is interesting. And maybe I missed something in Revelation 17. So I'm going to have to go back and look at that again.
Well, one thing I will say is that I do very strongly believe that this one world system will end up uniting all of the systems that are contrary to God, which would include Islam. And so I've often thought, while I do believe it will be the Vatican, I think he'll claim to be the Jewish Messiah, the Second Coming, the Muslim Mahdi, right? The 12th Imam, things like that. And I think he'll probably have something to, actually, that's exactly correct, LPP. But I do think it'll be something along those lines, where it's like, it's not that people who believed it would be the Mahdi are wrong. It's more that I think that the person who it is, that this Antichrist figure, will probably be using those to his advantage. And I did just pull it up here just because I wanted to, kind of show people. And I don't think I can actually show them, actually, because my screen isn't shared. But nonetheless, if you look up on Google, Wikipedia, DuckDuckGo, whatever you happen to use, or whatever website you're on, the city of 7 hills, the very first thing that'll come up, there's a bunch of other cities that are on 7 hills for sure. But it'll say the title City of 7 Hills usually refers to Rome, which was literally founded on 7 hills. Ever since, many cities have claimed to be built on 7 hills, but of course, it's always been back to Rome that they would refer to the city of 7 hills. And that's why I say, to a first century audience, right, it'd be exactly like saying the Big Apple. Everybody knows what that is. And if 2,000 years from now there ends up being 4 or 5 Big Apples, that's not really the point, because in 2021, when SJ and CJ were talking about the Big Apple, that was clearly New York, and that's what all their audience would have thought, and that's what they would have thought, and so on. And so when you start to kind of examine it from that perspective, it almost becomes impossible, right? That it's not, or at least that Rome is not involved.
Just to think about, I want to piggyback on some of these thoughts, because I really am finding this fascinating. And I'm thinking about Rome itself and how St. Peter was, the tradition says that he was crucified upside down in Rome, right where they built the St. Peter's Basilica. So it's right there at Vatican City. And it's interesting because then the Catholics and the Christians all sort of gravitated towards Rome, but that's away from Jerusalem. And it's just to think that this revelation was written well before all of that occurred. Not that Peter was killed, but that the Basilica and all of the popes and all the sorts of things that happened in Rome. And I don't know the whole history of the Catholic Church, to be honest, even though I was raised a Catholic. but I just think that's just really interesting. That even brings more support for God, like more evidence of God.
Well, and especially too, so I do a lot of these. I do this podcast called Watchdog, and it's strictly news based, right? It's all geopolitics and stuff of that nature. And actually I see here, LPP again, he says the current Pope is talking about uniformitarianism, has meetings with Muslim leaders and stuff like that. I don't know how much you know, Mr. Maddox, but if that is the extent of what you know, let me say boldly that it is much, much worse than you think. I've been reporting on the Vatican since 2016. And let me just say, each and every day I become more and more convinced that I'm not 100% sure that it won't be Pope Francis himself. I wouldn't boldly claim such a thing because I don't want people to get so, like, I don't want people to get, have a lack of belief when Pope Francis passes away and it turns out to not be him, right? But I wouldn't be as bold as to say it couldn't be him either, considering some of the things he's done. And just to give a brief overview.
Yeah, what are some things he's done? Because I haven't been following him at all, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually very, very happy to have been asked this question because I think this is, in my personal opinion, this is the most single important part of my own ministry. Is looking at the Vatican and the World Council of Churches and the things that they're doing. So, thing number one, we'll sort of start in order. And there are numerous things that happened in the past before this with other popes. For example, there was 1983 meeting of religions with John Paul II. There was 1999 and 98 agreements with the Lutherans and Methodists that sort of ended the Reformation, so to speak. Which, of course, I put that in quotes because if you're a true believer, the Reformation does not end until Christ returns. Sort of those other things, but those are all in the past sort of sets up, right? So I'll leave them for a moment and just stick with Francis. So starting off in 2014, a year after his initial election, because he was elected February 13th of 2013. Which ironically is 2013. I don't know if that actually means anything. That could totally just be a coincidence, but I always thought it was interesting.
That is interesting.
Right? Like it's a 0213 and then 2013. That's kind of, I don't know. Anyways, though. The first major thing that he does as far as this is concerned is he had a meeting with Shimon Peres, the former president of the state of Israel. Now, and to let people briefly know, the president of Israel is not the prime minister. It's not the same thing as the president here in the United States. It's much more analogous to like the Queen of England, right? Very ceremonial. But nonetheless, the head of state, right? Well, Shimon Peres, being the former president, went actually met with Pope Francis September of 2014 to pitch his idea for a United Nations of religions. And those are his words, not mine. And the idea would be exactly like it sounds. You have the UN, and it's got everything from your powerful nations like Russia, China, United States, to the nations that nobody even knows about, like Micronesia. You know what I mean? And he wanted to establish something like that for faith, right? So you'd have your Muslims and your Catholics and your Christians and all that. But then you would also have your Satanists, your atheists, your Jedi even, you know what I mean? And get all of these people together. Oh, shoot, I am getting a phone call. Can I briefly check out of this for just a second?
Sure.
I apologize.
Oh, no worries. So if you guys are in the audience, if you have a question for the synagogue, if you want a synagogue, I should say, if you have a question for CJ, just let me know. I'll definitely say that. And I see logical, plausible, probable says, CJ, I agree with you completely about the Catholic Church. Hate and Love Nothing says, fun fact, popes have all been fondled on a chair with a while in the bottom. I don't know what you're talking. I'm not sure what that means, but and then there was a female pope. I didn't even know there was a female. My history is terrible. I mean, here I was raised a Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school and freshman year of high school, and I don't know any of this stuff. And so I left the Catholic Church. In case anyone's wondering, I go to a Baptist church. I consider myself a Baptist now. So what else do we have? Tim Ott says the revelation to Abraham was liberation from the worship of the dead. Interesting. And so I'm just, and then Tim Otts also says, hate waiting for the scriptures to be taught to me. It's waiting to the scriptures. So I guess what we'll do while I wait for synagogue to come back is I'm going to take a look at Revelation 17 and just see exactly what this says, because I obviously missed something. So give me just a moment here. Okay, so Revelation 17. I pay a lot of attention to Revelation 12. That's the one I seem to focus the most on, but didn't know. Babylon, the prostitute on the beast. It says, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. Now, a couple observations just from reading this. You remember, one of the interesting things is when they put the jacket on Jesus, when they put the coat on him, when they were in the process of crucifying him, one report says purple, another one says scarlet. And so there was a color there's certain colors that are kind of a blend where someone might call it a purple or a scarlet. It's interesting she's wearing a coat that's the same color here. And it's also just interesting that this is a woman. So I do think that's interesting. What CJ said about women, if you look at the statistics, you'll see that more women are actually believers than males. The typical atheist is a younger man, usually a straight white man is a typical atheist who's probably averaging in his 30s. I forget the average age. But there's also been a study that says that the atheism retention rate is 30%. So that's good stuff if you're hoping for the atheists. One of the reasons why I want to answer the question that I posed on this video, as far as can we communicate with atheists, can we get along? I think we need to communicate with atheists. And a lot of atheists actually went through a phase. Maybe they had something bad happen to them where they kind of called out to God and they felt God didn't answer. And so they might go through those phases and come right out of it. Or there are people like Cy Gart and Sarah Selviander who were raised as atheists, and in their later years, they discovered Christianity. And so there's that possible too. And so logical, plausible, probable, John says the formal splits in Methodists, Presbyterians, etc. set things up for this person to step in and unify all faiths. That is just so interesting. I have not been following the Pope, so I'm excited to get Synagogue back here too. So it says, I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see how the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Okay, so that brings us to this Rome idea. And I'll ask him about the female pope too. So let's see. Okay, so where are we here? The beast who wants, okay. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. Okay, so this is the kings, rulers giving power and authority to the beast. And so CJ is positing that this person in authority who's unifying, if the Pope is doing that, unifying all of these world leaders in religion, bringing people together, and even bringing in atheists and Satanists and that kind of thing. It's just really interesting. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be called chosen and faithful followers. I want to point something out if you guys haven't observed this yet, but in Psalm 82, it's referred to the sons of God. So what's really interesting about that is it talks about there's only one Lord who's worthy of worship. And that's Yahweh, and that's the Trinity. But then we have these sons of God, these other spiritual beings that are inhabiting the earth. Through the books of the Bible, and Michael Heiser does a lot on this, we learn that the sons of God kind of went out into the world and they had authority at one point over all of these cities. And what happened with Jesus when he died, all authority, that's why he says all authority and power has been given to me. So the sons of God were not given the rights to have authority over these different lands around the world. However, that doesn't mean that they're gone. Okay, that doesn't mean that these spiritual forces aren't still there wreaking havoc. And so that helps to explain why we do see multiple faiths. And we do see people, say in the Hindu faith, saying that they've had religious experiences with spirits. The spirits just aren't the correct spirit. That's the answer. So Logical says, let's be honest, not all obviously, but a large chunk of those 30-something men are single and are searching for self-confidence. Yeah, that's probably true too. I think so. So that could be the case. So then what does it say? It says, then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So that is pretty interesting stuff. So what do we have? So Tim Ott apparently must not be a believer in Christianity, from what I'm getting in the chat here. And so Tim says, what's your cult called? Hate Love Nothing says, what's your cult called? So just waiting for a second. One of the things that I can say to the Catholic Church's benefit, one of the things that I do appreciate about the church is and this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I really appreciate the money that they've invested over the centuries into building beautiful churches that are awe-inspiring, because I think that's appropriate for God, that we walk into a church and be completely awe-inspired by the beauty of God's home. And so I do like that about the Catholic Church. I think that if we had more churches like that, people might actually realize the awe that they should have for God. But anyway, he's back. So I just read Revelation 17 to him, CJ, so that they know what we were talking about, what the context is.
Absolutely. And I was listening too, so I appreciate that a lot. I'm sorry about that also. I wasn't expecting that phone call to be that early, but that's okay.
That's okay. So you wanted to tell us about the Pope, what Pope Francis is doing. Right.
So and I was starting off on September 2014, right? Now in September 2014, we had the former president of Israel, Shimon Peres, going to the Vatican to meet with Pope Francis. And when he was there, he pitched this idea of a UN for religions, right? To set up this international body that would be just, representative of all the different faiths, and so they could make peace and talk with each other and all that sort of stuff. When he actually suggested this, it was his suggestion that Pope Francis be the one to lead it. So the general secretary, for lack of a better term, because, that's what we call it in the UN. So that was obviously the first major thing that sort of Pope Francis did in regard to the ecumenism, and not including some of the other stuff that he had already done, as far as he had said that Jesus Christ's life ended in earthly failure, namely the failure of the cross. Yeah, wait. Actually said that Jesus' life ended in what we would call an earthly failure, namely the failure of the cross.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I know, right? That's in fact, my dad actually, when he heard that, I was only 15 at the time, because it was just after Pope Francis has been elected. And he actually pointed to him and said, if that man is not the Antichrist, he certainly is a Antichrist.
Wow.
And that's always sort of stuck with me a little bit. But
well, know what else?
That was the first thing, right? This UN of religions. And one of the big reasons that's important is because Shimon Peres, when he was president of Israel back in the 90s, was actually doing a lot of secret meetings with the Pope at that time, who I believe was John Paul II, none of which we actually have the information for to this day. You can find a lot of conspiracy theories about those meetings, but the fact is we just really don't know what was said. The largest radio station in the state of Israel actually claims that they got inside information that it was discussing Palestinian peace, and it very well could have been. But the point being, though, that Shimon Peres is the same president who was in the 90s speaking with the Vatican about in these secret deals. And so not all of them were secret, by the way. There was also a 1995 deal that was made that was it was actually just recognition of the Vatican by Israel and of Israel by the Vatican.
I don't mean to be laughing, but I see this thing in the chat. I just can't. It says, Tim, I looked through your subscriptions. God can free you from your degeneracy. I find that funny. You actually looked at this guy. Tim, you might want to turn your subscriptions into non-public. And if they're whatever. Anyway, I'm sorry. It just made me somehow that hit my funny bone.
No, that is kind of interesting. Actually, I was looking a little bit when I was actually off for a second. I did look at this Tim O'Day character, or O'Days, or however you say that.
But what see, I heard the Pope say something about atheists all going to heaven too, or something like that, which I think strikes me as universalism or perennialism, and so I think that's
he was asked by a young boy, actually. The young boy said, "Well, my daddy was an atheist. Is he in hell?" And while I certainly understand the Pope being put in a just rough position right there, because this is just a young child, and you don't want to tell him what unfortunately is the truth. If your father died unrepentant of his sins, then yes, he is cast judgment upon himself. But he did. He completely and totally squealed, right? Or not squealed, but caved, I guess, and said no. If he was a good person, he got you baptized, that kind of stuff. That means he must be in heaven. And while, like I said, I understand wanting to console a young child, I also, I would never want to console a young child with lies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely put in a tough spot. I didn't realize that's how that came about. So what else does he believe? What else does he say that it's one of the things that the Catholic Church, one of the reasons why I am no longer a Catholic, I'll mention a couple of them. One is because I didn't like the way that they still have not handled the altar boy problem. The problem in the church with that. They still haven't handled that. And I think that's egregious. And the other thing is Catholic Church doesn't really follow the Bible. In a lot of ways, like just this idea that we have to have an intercessory, like we have to go to get forgiveness from a priest who tells us to say the Hail Mary 10 times and then say the Our Father once. If you look at a rosary, actually it's 9. You've got 9 Hail Marys and then 1 Our Father. 9 Hail Marys, 1 Our Father. That's how you're supposed to follow the rosary. Well, that's not how it should be. You should be focused on the Father. Mary's wonderful, and I think that the problem with the Protestants is they don't give her enough credit. But I don't think that people should be praying to her 9 times more than you're praying to the Father. I just, that's not. It's kind of whacked.
Well, it definitely is too, and I've actually, I'll pull it up and continue talking while I pull it up. That way, I don't waste time. But it is interesting. There is a message from Pope Francis to Chinese Catholics, and I'll actually kind of get into why that message was important in the first place, because it is in this chain of things which the Pope is doing. But he ends it with a prayer to Mary, and I'll actually read you guys the prayer if you'd like, because it's actually kind of terrifying that somebody who claims to be the leader of Christians would actually pray this sort of prayer.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear it.
Well, and in the meantime, while we're getting to that, I do want to point out some of the other things that have been. So literally within 10 days of that meeting between Pope Francis and Shimon Peres, which, by the way, if anybody's interested, you can find that article not only in my Watchdogs, where I've reported on it, but also the original source is Jerusalem Post. And you can find that article from the Jerusalem Post. I point that out for 2 reasons. Number one, so you can read it for yourself. And number 2, and this is the most important reason, this is not coming from InfoWars, right? It's not coming from Breitbart. It's not coming from Natural News or the world is run by reptilianilluminati.com. You know what I mean? This is coming from Vatican sources, Vatican state sources, because the Vatican is a nation, and from Israeli sources that are amongst the largest in their country. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Jerusalem Post is actually the largest newspaper in the state of Israel. So, just to sort of point those things out for you guys. But at any rate, so 10 days pass, and then they end up having a World Alliance of Religions for Peace in Seoul, South Korea. Now, Shimon Peres's idea is not the catalyst for WARP. WARP had already been, which is actually ironically what the acronym ends up standing for, World Alliance Religions for Peace, WARP, WARP. But nonetheless, that was already actually going to occur before Shimon Peres had actually pitched this idea. But it had a whole new meaning now that Shimon Peres had pitched the idea, right? And you kind of see that reflected in the WARP ceremonies, which you can go actually watch on YouTube if you'd like.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you. So they had this, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It was a World Alliance of Religions for Peace, right? They came together, they signed a contract with each other, right? And as a result of that, they now have a binding agreement to try and push towards peace for all religions. And it's not every religion that's currently included. In fact, most Protestant denominations are missing. But you do have a lot of Jewish sects, specifically Hasidic, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, Muslims, Buddhists are included in this, right? And so there's already this big sort of a movement starting in there, right? So then after you have the World Alliance of Religions for Peace, you start seeing more and more pushes towards ecumenism from the Pope. Now, some of the, I'm not going to go through all of them just because it would take too long, but some of the biggest include, so in 2018, on the 70-year anniversary of the World Council of Churches, the Pope actually went and met with the World Council of Churches, where they actually had a mass with each other, which for those of you who are Protestant, you will recognize as communion. So the World Council of Churches is now in communion with the Roman Catholic Church as of 2018, which just so happened to be the 70th year anniversary of the World Council of Churches. Same year, Pope Francis dedicated a Mormon temple in Rome. Now, and thinking about that, that's a really important thing, because the prophets of Mormonism didn't dedicate the Mormon temple in Rome. Pope Francis dedicated the Mormon temple in Rome, and the prophets of Mormonism were there watching him do it. And by the way, I noticed, just because I see this Hellbound Heathen says unproven conspiracy theories are very destructive. None of this is conspiracy theory. You can find all of this, like I said, you can look it up on Vatican News, which is the Vatican State official news source. You can look it up on LifeSite and Crux, which are Catholic official news organizations. America, which is a Jesuit official magazine. Jerusalem Post, which is the largest newspaper in Israel. I can assure you, when it comes to this topic in particular, I outright refuse to use partisan sources and to use conspiratorial sources, because I know how conspiratorial it sounds, which is why I will only be using the mainstream sources, the most mainstream sources I can find for that, right? Because it's just simply not the case that this is conspiracy, or that it's conspiracy theory, I should say. It is conspiracy. It's multiple people coming together for a set agenda.
So the general idea with this whole thing is that you see it's continuing to move towards this idea of acceptance of all of these religions from the Pope, like accepting the Mormon faith, which goes in direct contrast, by the way, to Galatians 1:8, that says that if a prophet comes about and says something that goes counter to what we see in the good book, then this is a prophet we shouldn't listen to. And so for him to do that actually makes a major statement, because it goes against what the Bible tells us.
Right, and it's important too to note that all of these things have a set goal that is not the theory of anyone else, right? It was there in 2014 when they actually decided, Pope Francis and Shimon Peres, we want to move forward with this setting up of a world alliance of religions in the same way that we would set up our world alliance of nations in the UN, right? And we don't have that yet, but we get closer and closer to it. I mean, that World Council of Churches doing communion with the Pope, that basically, for all intents purposes, makes the Pope actually an active, although observer, member of the World Council of Churches. His being a member of WARP actually makes him like a member of this World Alliance of Religions for Peace, right? He's actually there. He's already a part of it. He's also an observer member of the United Nations, I'd point out, because he is actually a head of state. And there's numerous other things that we can even mention like that, right? But the thing is it actually does get a little bit worse than just dedicating temples and having meetings and going to World Alliance of Religions for Peace and things like that, right? And actually, it's interesting. I just saw Rachel ends where it delves into conspiracy theory are the conclusions drawn from the facts. Again, Rachel, the conclusion is what we got first. The conclusion is what it happened in 2014. Everything else is a push toward that conclusion. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take the word of the Jerusalem Post. You can take the word of excuse me one moment. I'm getting another phone call. Jeez.
Oh, I should probably actually it's easier. We might have to cut this because I gotta probably head out. So I'll let you get your call. But let me but I agree. I think you have cited some very good sources. So you guys I don't think that this is all. I think it's something that we should keep our eyes on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you want me to let? So I'm going to go ahead because do you want to answer that phone?
Well, I got it on hold at the moment. I'll wait a moment. You said you probably wanted to end out, right?
Yeah, we should probably, because we've almost gone 2 hours, which is pretty great.
So with that, then I would actually just.
We should cut out CJ.
Hang on just a second. I will be there in just a sec. I'm in the room. I'm in the room. I didn't mean to. Okay, I'll be there in just a second. All right, bye. By the way, I noticed Hellbound Heathen is actually just completely and totally uninterested. He says nothing was cited. I literally just cite 5 separate news sources, but whatever. That doesn't actually matter to me. He can do whatever it is that he wants. So the last thing I just would want to get to, because I think it's very important for this, before we leave, is the Amazonian Synod, actually, where the Pope actually had a synod. You can look this up on LifeSite News, by the way, once again, mainstream Catholic source. He actually got together in the Amazon, had a synod in the Amazon, and declared that all rites, R-I-T-E-S, were worship of the self-same God, which, by the way, that would include the Canaanites, burning children alive. If it's all rights, it's all rights, right? He also pointed out that the Pope, right, and his cronies while he was there, he also pointed out that he said that the church needs to be more accepting of pagans. And they called the Pachamama statue, which is an Incan goddess of fertility, Our Lady of the Amazon. And they took the Pachamama statue into St. Peter's Basilica, where, of course, Pope Francis happens to be. So you see on all the, and there's so much more we could get into if we had more time. But the point is, right, you have so many different elements where it's, Pope Francis trying to ally with the Vatican, or not the Vatican, the Mormons. Pope Francis trying to ally with the Muslims, trying to ally with Amazon pagans, right? With the World Council of Churches, so on and so forth. And, you see here a build up towards this UN of religions, which the Pope himself, at least he thinks he will end up heading. And hopefully
that's interesting stuff. That's definitely something to watch out for. And I think this idea of the 7 hills and calling our attention to Rome is really, really interesting, how this all fits together. And so, Synagogue, what are you working on now where people can find you? Are you got any videos or debates coming up?
Absolutely. So I will have a video tonight, actually, very short, just talking about how God is not mocked in regards to the storming of the Capitol. And then I'll have a video tomorrow, a long hour-long video on New Testament canonization, and a debate this Friday on Modern Day Debate. We'll be discussing, me and Smokey Saint will be discussing communism versus capitalism, and we'll be going against Cider Import and Leophilius. So that'll be
that's going to be great. So I take it you're on the good side.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Yeah, it goes against human nature. Communism does, and it says, we should all work really hard, but we're going to pay you differently. And there's a funny little quote from the Chinese. The Chinese said, "You pretend to pay us, and we'll pretend to work."
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That's the deal. So, okay. Well, I want to say thank you guys. I'm going to put links to your channel in here. They can find you at your channel with the same name, right? The Synagogue.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, you guys please go over to his channel, like and subscribe, and make sure you watch his videos that are coming up, and make sure you watch the Modern Day Debate and cheer for him in the crowd, because we're going to need to make sure that our people know that we support capitalism, individualism, and this idea of hard work and being paid appropriately for your hard work. I also want to say I'm sorry to Tim Ott that I laughed like I did when I saw that. I just found that something about that was funny, because I've never had somebody say they went into somebody else's channel while in the chat on my channel. So something about that just seemed funny, but anyway, so thank you. And Hellbound Heathen, some of you guys follow, and Taking Back I have a protected account on Twitter now, if any of you guys want to follow me, and I can follow you back. It's because I don't remember some of your Twitter handles, but you can reach me at _DASH_023 if you want to follow me on Twitter. So thank you. You guys, please like, subscribe, and do come again. And whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God.
Amen.
So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and end this and say thank you.